All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We bring you discussion, debate, and analysis. And we got Uncle Lou on the line from LouTube. So if you have no idea who we're going to talk to in the next few minutes, which I'm guessing most of you do, you got to check him out. Just go to LouTube, Uncle Lou, either search term. I think is going to help you out on YouTube to find his analysis of college football. Lou, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. We had you on maybe last off season. It was a good time. So definitely enjoy your stuff over there. I see that you're diving into some best case, worst case scenarios around the country. People love that stuff. Basically, looking at the SEC, man, this thing has been clamped down for quite some time now. Time to shake things up, I would hope. But Georgia's obviously been the team that's been most capable of showing that they can do it, but they haven't knocked the door down yet. What are your thoughts, your early thoughts about the SEC? Obviously, we're just diving into spring practice, but your early thoughts about maybe what could be different this year?
I do think that we have an opportunity in 2019 to have more of a race in the East and the West, definitely than we had last year. I mean, if you polled any fair-minded 100 college football fans, almost every single one of them had Alabama winning the West and Georgia winning the East. And although I think those are probably going to be the two favorites again this year, I think Florida, I think a legitimate case could be made this year for Florida in the East. And with Burrow coming back at LSU and sort of the season they had last year, and I mean, I know they weren't even really close, I guess, with Alabama last year, the 29-0 game. But and then Texas A&M, I'm a lot higher on Texas A&M, I think, than the average person. But I think Texas A&M has a good shot of being a legitimate top 10 team, and I would put LSU as probably a legitimate top 10 contender, and Florida. So I do think Alabama and Georgia will be, like, if you want to look at like the media days that they do every summer, I do think Georgia and Alabama will be the two teams that come out of media days as the quote unquote favorite. But I think you would be silly not to at least consider Florida out of the East and LSU and Texas A&M out of the West. I think it will be tougher for Georgia to win the East this year than it was the last 2 years, and I think it will be tougher for Alabama.
Yeah, Jimbo had a little bit of the shine taken off of him that last year at Florida State. But if you really look at what he was able to do there, it's easy to say, hey, anybody wins at Florida State. But obviously, Bobby Bowden didn't do it his last 5 or 6 years. And Willie Taggart had some issues, to say the least, last year. So Jimbo's a main player in this thing. And we're already seeing the dividends of what he's been able to do on the recruiting trail, and they just were a much better football team. If you look at Alabama's season in the regular season before they hit Atlanta and Georgia, Texas A&M was the team that gave them the most resistance and obviously took Clemson down to the wire. So Jimbo can get it done, and we're already starting to see that a little bit. Then he goes to a bowl game against NC State and just completely annihilates them. Lou, you bring up Joe Burrow, so I'm interested to see if he's going to take another step, because people were expecting a lot. He pretty much did his job. He didn't produce dynamic scoring or yardage statistics, anything like that. But I think people also have to take into consideration that the kid walked on campus like 2 days before they started practice in August. He wasn't acclimated to anything, and he pretty much just did the job. And I'll be interested to see if he takes off. And his head coach just got an extension today. Coach O, with a 2-year extension. They gave him a $500,000 raise. I don't know if you've ever received any $500,000 raise. That's not come around to me recently, but is the guy doing the job, do you think?
He's done better than I thought he would do. I was really hard on LSU when they named him interim coach to start with, and then sort of made him the permanent coach. But I don't really think I was crazy in thinking that, because when you watched what was going on there, it appeared as though LSU didn't think he was that good of a coach either. I mean, they were looking all over the place for a replacement for that guy. And We just talked about Jimbo Fisher. Jimbo Fisher would be the head coach at LSU right now if he wanted to. LSU did not want Orgeron. So, a lot of the LSU fans give me a hard time because I was wrong about Orgeron. But let's be real, LSU was wrong about Orgeron too. I mean, they were pushing this guy out the door 2 seasons ago. I mean, we were 48 hours away from Jimbo Fisher being announced head coach at LSU, basically. And, that fell through. And they said, well, we're just kidding. We really do like Orgeron. And it was obvious they didn't want him, but it's worked out. I mean, I know LSU has higher goals than what they hit last year. They want to win the West and be competing for playoff spots. I get that. But you look at last year's preseason projections from everybody. They had LSU around the 7 or 8 win mark. No one was that high on LSU last year. So they proved me wrong. They proved a lot of people wrong. And Burrows, I think, is a pretty good quarterback. And I think he's a great quarterback for a team like LSU. I mean, LSU is going to have an NFL defense, and they want to run the ball. Now, they don't have a Leonard Fournette on the roster that anyone's aware of right now. They recruit at an insane level, so we'll see. But, Burrow doesn't have to win a whole lot of games for LSU. He's sort of like Jake Fromm in that way. I question whether or not a Burrow or a Fromm, for that matter, can beat, an Alabama or a Clemson right now, or whatever other team happens to be in that top 3 or 4 at the end of this coming season. It's been a long time since a quote unquote game managing quarterback. And I think that's what most people would consider Burrow to be. I consider Fromm to be that. And I'm the most hated person on planet Earth. If you poll Georgia fans, but I think Fromm's a game manager. I mean, I think he's the best game manager in all of college football, but he's a game manager. He's winless when he throws over 30 passes. Georgia is winless under Jake Fromm when they rush for under 4 yards per carry. So I question whether or not in today's college football a game manager can win it all. But I think Burrow is good enough to win a lot of games on a team like LSU.
We've got Uncle Lou on the line talking Georgia, the SEC, and the nation. You can catch him on LouTube, so just search LouTube or Uncle Lou. I've done it myself, so it's going to take you right there on YouTube. So you're saying the most hated man on the planet for Georgia fans. From what I've seen, Lou, all you have to do is look at the background. All you have to do is watch a little bit of the content. You're a Georgia maniac. You love it. You love them, but you're trying to cut it straight as much as you can. And you even say, hey, I'm going to lean Georgia. I'm going to tell you at the point of the game, we're going to beat anybody. But at the same time, during the offseason, I'm going to try to be neutral, and I'm going to try to give you some decent analysis. And it's only fair that we don't live in a perfect world. I'm going to critique my football program. Is there anything wrong with that?
Right. I don't think so. As a fan, we always want more than what we're getting. I guess maybe unless you're an Alabama fan, but hell, they want more now, right, than what they got last year. So, if a player plays good, I'm the first one to say it. But if he plays bad, I say that too. Fromm played terrible against LSU. You don't have to be a football analyst really to know that. You just have to watch the game. He was terrible. Didn't play that good against Texas. We played Alabama the last 2 years. And while I don't think Jake Fromm has had terrible games against Alabama, we've scored a total of 10 points in the second half against Alabama in 2 games. So we're averaging 5 points per game in the second half against Alabama. You're not going to win very many games against good teams scoring 5 points in the second half. It's not going to happen. We scored a touchdown against them this past season in the SEC championship game early in the third quarter, and we kicked a field goal in the second half of the national title game. Outside of that, we've done nothing offensively against Alabama in the second half, and you're just not going to win very many big games that way. Now, a lot of that has to do with coaching, getting too conservative. We had big leads at halftime in both those games, so I'm not blaming the losses on Fromm, but, quarterbacks get way too much credit when a team wins, and they get way too much credit when a team or blame when a team loses. This isn't anything new. It's been happening forever. There's a line of Georgia fans a mile long that will sit you down and talk to you for an hour about how Jake Fromm led us to a national title game in 2017. If that's true, then he also led us to a Sugar Bowl loss this year, led us to a loss against Auburn, led us to a loss against Texas, led us to a loss against LSU. You can't give Jake Fromm credit for taking us to the national title game and then try to tell me, well, it's a team game. That's why we lost to Auburn. Obviously, it's a team game. No one person is to blame, but we had, the greatest college football running back duo in history, an elite defense, and we had some things go our way in 2017. I haven't seen Fromm put the team on his back. That's what I'm saying. Now, he hasn't needed to 90% of the time, and I'm not complaining about our win-loss record. We've won a whole lot of games over the last 2 years. I'd like to win a couple more, and I'm not sure if any team can do that with a quarterback in today's football. I don't know if a quarterback with 2,700 total yards can win a national title. It hasn't happened since A.J. McCarron. Fromm had 2,700 yards passing, negative 27 rushing. Now, he's not a run-around guy, but negative 27, I mean, that's unacceptable. He takes too many sacks. He doesn't like to you could probably count on one hand the number of times Jake Fromm has thrown a ball away. Like, you know how you see a quarterback just sail it over the bench or something. Takes too many sacks. That's where the negative rushing yards come in. I mean, Trevor Lawrence isn't running for 1,000 yards, but he's got 75, 100, something like that for the year. So that tells me if he needs to escape or scramble or whatever, he's able to do it on occasion. I mean, I like Jake Fromm. Listen, before we had Jake Fromm, we had a string of quarterbacks that, I was banging my head against the wall with these people, Grayson Lambert, and I mean, the list goes on and on. Fromm miles ahead of them without question. But you also have to agree, I think anyway, he's been the quarterback of the two most talented teams in UGA history. I mean, we won it all in 80, and we had great teams with Herschel in 80, 81, and 82. But name me three other players off those teams. You can't do it unless you're a diehard Georgia fan. You just can't. These teams that Jake Fromm has had have been absolutely loaded. I mean, last year he had 3 NFL wide receivers and an NFL tight end. He threw for 2,700 yards.
No doubt. I think I can give you 3. I think I can go 3. I might not be able to do 4. I can go Buck Ballou, yep, Terry Hogue, Lindsey Scott. Yep. And if you give me some kind of a list, if I had a multiple choice, I know I could pick out a bunch of other guys, but I'm kind of a nerd that way.
Yeah.
Going back 39 years now. All right. We got Uncle Lou on the line talking Georgia, the SEC, and the nation. Check him out on YouTube. You started to go down this road, Lou, with the coaching. You mentioned the coaching. So I don't think there's any question that any reasonable Georgia fan or college football fan that likes to analyze programs would say Mark Richt had the program here, which was winning 75% of the time. I think a few people might be surprised because of his lack of getting to SEC championship games and winning them, that he did finish in the top 10 like 8 out of 15 years. Right. So they were really good. But there's no question Kirby Smart, within 2 years, boom, another level, elite of college football, national championship game, SEC championship, etc. But at the same time, so in terms of building the program, recruiting, getting the kids prepared, having them play well, consistently elite football throughout the schedule, he's raised the level. But getting into the game, and then you talk about not being a football analyst, but just adding up the math would be, okay, 13-point lead against Alabama. They blow it. And then there were specific plays in both games. Then the next year, obviously, big lead against Alabama, blow it. And in a few other situations against some decent teams. So is there concern that, man, this is the guy, we don't want to lose him, but man, can you sharpen up the skills in game?
Yeah. Well, something that I have to constantly remind myself and other people sometimes too, we're talking about a guy who's been a head coach for 3 years, and that does matter. Yes, he's been in and around college football since he was 18 years old. I get that, understand that. He worked under Nick Saban, greatest college football coach of all time. I understand all of that. Being a head coach is totally different than being a defensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator or anything else. And there's a learning curve. I mean, when Nick Saban was in his third year as a Power Five head coach, he was busy trying to figure out ways to beat Indiana and Northwestern, and he wasn't all that successful.
It's a good point.
Michigan State has gone farther under D'Antonio than they ever went under Saban. That doesn't mean D'Antonio is a better coach than Saban, but Saban was learning what to do at Michigan State. It was his first Power Five job. So Kirby has made some mistakes without question. There's some issues surrounding winning on the road. There's been some obvious boneheaded decisions made in the second halves of some really big games. Now, I'm of the opinion that all new coaches make mistakes. Jeremy Pruitt made mistakes last year coaching-wise at Tennessee, but he made them in losses to Vanderbilt in a game that no one watched or cared about. So when you're making those mistakes in an SEC title game or a national championship game, obviously those mistakes are going to get magnified. So am I happy with Kirby Smart? 100%. I think he's done a great job. The recruiting is at a level where we've never seen it. He's winning, 80% of his games. He's lost 5 games in the last 2 years. He's undefeated in the East the last 2 seasons. Say what you want about the East. I promise you there are a lot of divisions in college football that are worse than the East. Pick any ACC division, pick any Pac-12 division, pick the Big Ten division that doesn't have all the good teams in it. The point is it's not easy to go 11-1. I mean, he's done it 2 years in a row, hasn't lost a game in the East since 2016, beats the SEC East teams by an average of 3 touchdowns over the last 2 years. That's not easy to do. Mark Richt has some great teams. Mark Richt, you mentioned all the top 10 teams he had. Go back and look at the scores of the Vanderbilt games in those years. So I'm not complaining about having Kirby Smart. Now, was I complaining 5 minutes after the SEC title game ended this year? Of course I was. I was mad. I was pissed off. Kirby had some boneheaded decisions in that game. Same thing in the national title game. But he's learning. And I don't think any reasonable or rational Georgia fan is trying to say that, well, if Kirby Smart doesn't do this, or this year, he's gone. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Anybody that says that is ridiculous. I mean, this guy's not going anywhere for the foreseeable future unless he chooses to, the NFL or whatever, which I haven't heard anything, about that. But he's here to stay. And I'm in a lot of Georgia groups on Facebook and talk to people on Twitter and all this kind of, and very rarely do you hear somebody even make any type of mention about wanting to get rid of Kirby or whatever. Now people criticize him, but he makes a lot of money to get criticized, so he can deal with it.
And Lou, it's a great point that you make about the divisions, because I talk about that all the time. Sure, if you're rooting for LSU or Florida or Texas A&M, it's not going to be good enough for you to sit in second or third place forever. You got to knock off. You're paying a guy elite money to finally win a championship, but there's work to be done, and Nick Saban's doing it better than anybody has pretty much in history for an extended period of time. You send LSU or Florida, even Kentucky this past year, which people weren't impressed with it, but that defense was ridiculously good. You send them out to play in Pitt's division that they won, or the Pac-12 South, or like you mentioned, the Big Ten West, which I think has a lot of teams that are building, but nowhere close to the likes of the LSU, Texas A&M, and Florida type programs. And they're winning championships. They're going to conference championship games. I don't think there's any question about that, which leads me to, I've had a number of people that love the ACC that call me, write me all the time, and the last statistic that they could grab to get a hold of to try to shoot me down, because I don't think there's any comparison between the SEC and the ACC. It's ridiculous. It's not even second best. I asked them as soon as they come at me, who's the second best team in the ACC? Well, Florida State and Miami are down. They were both pretty awful, especially Florida State last year. Who's your second best team? Well, your second best team record-wise last year was Syracuse. Now, don't tell me that Syracuse can play with Florida, Kentucky, LSU, Texas A&M, Mississippi. They're just not. They're not that good. So, but they point out 24-20. I guess the ACC. I haven't gone through all the numbers. I guess the ACC has a 24-20 advantage over the SEC in the last 5 years. But they don't put it into context. When you got Kentucky and Louisville playing every year, and you've got Florida State, and before this past year, Louisville was better than Kentucky, and Florida State was better than Florida. Then, if you got these locked-in matchups, that's what you're going to get. But do you see any comparison between those two conferences?
No, not in 2018. Now there was a 3 or 4 year stretch there from around 2012, 2013, around the time Jameis Winston got to Florida State through maybe 2016 or so.
Yeah,
the ACC was pretty good. I mean, you had Florida State, of course, winning a national title and winning 10, 11 games, and Clemson was sort of starting their ascension up to where they are now. UNC even had a pretty good year in there one year. NC State was good a couple of years ago. And then, of course, you had Clemson beating South Carolina a bunch of times in a row, Florida State beating Florida a bunch of times in a row. Louisville got the better of Kentucky a time or two. So you had that big weekend at the end of the year where the SEC was losing a bunch of games to the ACC. And so it was easy to sort of point at that. But last year, I mean, there's no way anybody can, with a straight face, say the ACC was anywhere near the SEC last year. I mean, it just wasn't. And you can always find us one or two stats here or there to cherry pick to try to prove whatever argument it is you're trying to prove. Like, the Big 12 people, well, we were 3-1 in bowl games against the SEC. Okay. You're not a better conference than the SEC. I mean, bowl record aside, congratulations. You got some good matchups and you won. Hats off. Great. Texas, congratulations. Your best team can't win a playoff game. Kansas State loses to Vanderbilt. I mean, the Big 12 is not anywhere near the SEC, nor is the only one who even has any. The Big 10 East, I guess it is, with Ohio State and Penn State, and Michigan and Michigan State, and that's a really, really good division. A really, really good division. And I would put that division up against any other division, including the SEC West, over the last couple of years. But conference for conference, I mean, the SEC is just where it's at.
Yeah, so I had to point out for these people also, Clemson won 8 of those 24 games all by themselves. And like you say, 5 straight years against South Carolina. So you're pitting like the 10th best team in the SEC that's winning during that span, going 3-9 and 6-7 against the best team or the second best team in the country. So that's not a fair, like-seeded matchup. And then Clemson's playing Auburn and Texas A&M, which were good, but they're losing 4 and 5 games a year, and Clemson's one of the 2 best teams in the country. So they're not like-seeded matchups. You can't just say we went 24-20 against you. We're better.
Right.
Not a good comparison there. The elite of college football, Lou. Obviously, Alabama, Clemson, right behind. I'm thinking Ohio State, Georgia, Oklahoma, and there's a mess after that. Is that pretty much how you see it? And is there anybody capable of jumping up there?
I agree with you. Alabama and Clemson, I think, are clearly the cream of the crop in college football, and anyone not named Alabama and Clemson is chasing those 2 teams, and that includes Georgia, Oklahoma, and Ohio State. After that, you have a lot of really, really good teams. But it's hard for me to understand how anyone could put those 5 teams that you named. It would be hard for me to understand how anybody could rank any other team ahead of any of those 5. Not debating the order of, well, is Georgia 3rd or Oklahoma or what? That's a fair debate. But like trying to tell me Michigan is in better shape right now than Georgia or Oklahoma or Ohio State, no. LSU, no. Texas A&M, no. Florida hasn't won the SEC in 11 years, no. I mean, so yeah, it's those 2, and then it's those 3, and then it's 10, 15, 20 teams, whatever you want to name, pick out the best 3 or 4 from each conference after that and shuffle those up, and that's your top 20 teams. But to me, those 5 are clearly in the best situation right now.
Yeah, so I got to think these Gator fans are kind of coming after you this off season, feeling a little full of themselves after what happened last year. Even though they lost to you pretty decidedly in the second half, that they're feeling pretty good about themselves and ready to make a run at you.
Yeah, and their season ended well. I mean, they had a good win over a demoralized Michigan team, and you know, I hate that it's this way. I can't stand it, but teams like Michigan and Georgia, and it really pissed me off. Georgia's attitude towards the Sugar Bowl just, and I've made no secret about it. It really pissed me off, and I'm not making an excuse. I've been on video multiple times. Texas won. They were the better team. They dominated us. Congratulations. It just pisses me off. Georgia, they made a national title game in 2017. That's great. That's awesome. I don't know who Georgia thinks they are. That, oh, it's just the Sugar Bowl. Like I don't get that. I don't understand it. When's the last time we won the Sugar Bowl? I mean, it's been it's not like we play in the Sugar Bowl every year. The whole attitude surrounding the Georgia program leading up to the Sugar Bowl just really irritated me. And so I think it's great that Florida went out and beat Michigan, but I think Michigan suffered from a lot of the same things that Georgia suffered from leading up to that game. Obviously, I don't follow the Michigan program as closely as I do Georgia or whatever, but Michigan was in a very similar spot to Georgia late in the season. You needed one more win. That's it. Michigan needed that win over Ohio State, and they'd have been in the playoff, and they got blown out. Georgia needed a win over Alabama. They couldn't get it. They lost in one of the most demoralizing ways possible. Basically, a repeat of 2017. Huge halftime lead. Backup quarterback comes in and humiliates you. And Georgia just gave up at that point. I mean, you had players quitting that didn't play. Half the players that did play should have quit. It was embarrassing. As a Georgia fan, I was embarrassed at the performance and the product that Georgia put on the field. And the two people that I blame for that the most are Kirby Smart and Jake Fromm. Kirby Smart's the head man. It's his job to recognize what was happening. And he either failed to recognize what was happening or didn't care in terms of the attitude that was surrounding the team, the attitude that the players had. You had players tweeting the College Football Playoff Committee. That should never happen. Can you imagine Alabama players tweeting the playoff committee? No, it would never happen. And it shouldn't happen at Georgia, and really it shouldn't happen anywhere else. And Jake Fromm, as the leader of the team, did a piss poor job of reeling the guys in or getting some sort of leadership team together. You get 4 or 5 guys and you say, okay, you handle this group of guys, you handle this group of guys, you handle, get them focused. We're not in the playoffs. It is what it is. It's the Sugar Bowl. It's a huge game. It's Texas. And the ball was just dropped on every level. And I was absolutely, it wasn't that we lost. I mean, obviously that hurts. But to just show up like that with almost an attitude of entitlement and the Sugar Bowl is beneath us, that's ridiculous. And as a Georgia fan, that really, really bothered me. And I hope that something has been done about that, that the coaches got together or pulled together some juniors and seniors on this coming up year's team. And that kind of attitude is really, really bad for a program.
Yeah, Georgia and Texas in a similar or Georgia and Michigan in a similar situation. So, yeah, they've got the disappointment of we didn't get the job done at the end of the season. We're let down by our bowl situation. We should be playing for a championship. Ohio State let down for in a different situation. They blew it earlier. They tried to make up for it. They made a big stretch run. They didn't get the selection. They took care of business in the Rose Bowl. You can look at it different ways. People still ask me Texas, Georgia. I still ranked Georgia ahead of Texas in my poll at the end of the year because I just think they're a better team and they had a better season overall, even though, yes, all credit to Texas. They focused on the game. They played their hearts out. they were ready, they were prepared, they got the job done. I think anytime there's a game to be played, that if you're a true competitor, you go out there and you lay your heart on the line, you get it done, and you don't make excuses. A la a lot of teams we could point out, some Auburn fans the year before against UCF, fill in the blank. I know the Michigan situation.
We've seen it from Alabama on the rare occasion where they miss out on the BCS title game. I mean, they've lost 2 Sugar Bowls under Nick Saban, one to Oklahoma and one to Utah in similar situations. So I don't think this is like, there's some people saying, oh, Georgia's going to be, yep, that's it. Georgia's run is over. Look what happened in the Texas game. I don't think you can look at it that way. I mean, Georgia is top 3 recruiting classes the last 3 years. We lose a couple of wide receivers on offense, but other than that, almost everybody comes back. 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen. Georgia's not going anywhere because they lost the Sugar Bowl. I mean, that's ridiculous. So I don't think losing to Texas projects negatively for next year. It's that attitude that's got to be nipped in the bud. That can permeate a program and eat it up from the inside out. The attitude that caused us to lose to Texas is what worries me, not the loss itself.
All right, folks, I encourage you to check out LouTube. Just again, in the search, go to Uncle Lou, YouTube, LouTube. Any of those work, I think. You just throw them in there and you find him, and it's great stuff. You'll be entertained, you'll be informed. It's good stuff, and certainly you can mix it up with the chat room as well. Lou, we appreciate you stopping by, man. It was a good time.
Yeah, I always enjoy it, man. Thanks for having me on, and hopefully we can do this again maybe once we get closer to the start of the season.
Absolutely.